Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. On Monday, Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall issued a press release that halted the creation of any new homeless shelters for the next 6 months. This comes as the city looks at conditions under which it could approve conditional use permits for shelters. This move by the mayor's office, which is arguably the most progressive group on the issue of homelessness in the city's history, highlights the fact that this issue is extremely nuanced. So tonight, we want to look into some of those nuances. Kicking off our conversation tonight is former State Senator Wayne Niederhauser and currently the State of Utah's Homelessness Services Coordinator. And Wayne, thank you so much for joining us tonight and welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Rosie. It's great to be here.
Wayne, you were appointed as the State Homeless Services Coordinator 6 months ago. What have you learned in that time about the scope of homelessness in Utah?
I served in the legislature for 12 and a half years, dealt with a lot of issues, but as legislators we deal with, high level, deal with it on a high level. And so, a lot of the details I just didn't understand. And so when I first took this position, I went on a tour from St. George to Logan to Tooele, all over the state, determining what the issues were surrounding people that were unsheltered. And I found that this is a statewide issue. It's a statewide problem. We have unsheltered people all over our state. And so the legislature in the last general session created this position in the Office of Homeless Services. We now are charged with supporting, helping to fund our local homeless coordinating councils. One of those councils is here in Salt Lake County. We call it the Coalition, the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness. And so I've had a chance to go out and visit with people that are unsheltered, and I've now become not an expert, but I know a lot about what we need to do to help make the system better.
It's really important that our viewers understand that homelessness is a statewide issue and not just a city or county issue. Now, the Salt Lake City Mayor's Office, they weren't able to come on our show to talk about the state of shelters in the city. So we'd like to ask you about how you view the role that Salt Lake City plays in this issue versus other cities.
Well, it ends up being a central city issue wherever you are. So if you go to northern Utah, it's Ogden becomes the centerpiece for homeless services. If you're in Salt Lake County, it's Salt Lake City and probably South Salt Lake, and then Midvale has the family shelter. If you're in Utah County in that area, it's Provo. If you're in Washington County, it's St. George. And the reason for that is that's where the services are. That's where the like here in Salt Lake County, that's where the 4th Street Clinic is for health care. It's where the St. Vincent's Center is, where you get 3 meals a day. And so those services attract those who are experiencing homelessness, our unsheltered population. And so it becomes a central city issue just because that's where the services are.
Right, and every area has its own unique needs. So we're curious, what are some of the short-term and long-term plans that you are thinking about to address homelessness? And could you give us a little insight on how complex these plans are?
Well, the system is fairly complex, but I think the answers are more simple. We have this housing crisis here in Utah and I think across the country. And that's a housing affordability issue. But when we're talking about chronic homelessness, housing is important, but that's not the problem. It's a mental and behavioral health issue. And I don't believe we're focused enough on on the core issues surrounding the unsheltered. We try to get them into housing, and sometimes it doesn't stick, and they're back out on the streets. We got people coming in from our criminal justice system. They're in jail, and then they end up back on the streets. It becomes kind of a spin cycle for a lot of people. Many people have been in housing, and it just didn't work for them. And I think it's because we're not focused on that person's the trauma they've experienced, what mental or behavioral health issues they deal with. And so we need to focus on the individual, what those individual needs are, and what opportunities that individual needs.
Wayne, we have time for one question left. So I'm wondering, given your last answer, is this a funding issue? Are we funding the right solutions or, the right avenues to address this issue? Are you where you want to be with funding?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that we have a lot of service providers and there's a lot of good being done. And the money is coming, some from the state, a lot from the federal government. We've got philanthropic people donating to our homeless system. And we could always use more because sometimes it's difficult to get enough case managers to help manage the population, enough treatment, effective treatment. And so I've got an ask into the governor's office to get $200 million more for affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. It'll have to be passed by the legislature if we can get it into the governor's budget. And in that, we want to build in case management so that we're not only housing people, but we're helping them stay in the housing and get the services they need.
Yeah, it seems like there's never enough money to address and tackle this issue, but efforts from advocates like yourself is what keeps the hope, going. You've been hearing from Wayne Niederhauser, the state's Homeless Services Coordinator. And Wayne, thank you so much for being here tonight and continuing this conversation with us.
Thank you, Rosie. It's good to be here.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to our discussion on the complexity of the issues experienced by our unsheltered population. Up next in our conversation are two advocates for our unsheltered communities. Wendy Garvin, Executive Director of Unsheltered Utah, and Carl Moore, co-founder of PANDOS, which stands for Peaceful Advocates for Native Dialogue and Organizing Support. Thank you both for being here tonight. I'd like to start this conversation with Carl. Carl, we just heard from the State Homeless Coordinator. Talk about how you view his role in aiding our unsheltered population.
Well, it's a I don't know. I asked him earlier, how he feels about it, and it's definitely can be an overwhelming role for anybody. But by talking to him, I have faith that he's getting out there and he's wanting to know what the issues are. He's wanting to know how best to do it, and he's definitely listening to the people. It's just a matter of getting everyone else to listen. The whole situation with our unsheltered population is one that people don't really understand all the nuances, and he mentioned some of those nuances like behavior and mental health, which are critical, and I would even add, just economic, the economic situation that we're all in. I mean, we're all one paycheck. Most of us are one paycheck away from being on the streets ourselves.
Now, Wendy, we have a state homeless coordinator, we have a city coordinator in Salt Lake City, and probably other city and counties across the state are thinking about the issues of homelessness, not to mention there are quite, grassroots, nonprofit organizations like both of yours. So that's a lot of voices at the table, and they're probably not always in agreement. So Wendy, how do you all coordinate your efforts?
Well, we meet frequently. I am a member of the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, and there are many meetings with all of the various different advocates from the different organizations. And we talk. I think that it's actually a pretty good community for talking a lot, even if we don't agree. We connect with each other on social media, and we set up meetings, and we work through our various differences of opinions, because the one thing that you can count on in the homeless service industry is everybody involved really cares about the population and the homeless crisis that we're dealing with right now. There aren't people involved who aren't trying to help. They just come about it from a different point of view.
Carl, what's been your experience and your organization's experience when it comes to trying to coordinate efforts with all these different voices that are at the table?
Well, coordination is like the hardest thing to do. We've just found that being autonomous and being just there for everyone when we can, that's where we are. That's where that's where I'm at myself. It's just, we all, like Wendy has said, you know, a lot of our discussion is on social media, on Facebook, and just coordinating there, just knowing where people are and helping each other out. One of the big things is just leaving egos at the door. I mean, in any organizations, egos are an issue, and I think that in this case, you know, we've been able to get over all those egos and to help our relatives out.
Now, Carl, stay with me. Along with the different voices, there's different opinions on how we should help the unsheltered, both in the short and the long term. And you mentioned nuances. Is there a nuance that sticks out to you, or one that you've maybe had some difficulty in facing and dealing with when it comes to honing in on one specific aspect of the problem?
Well, there's short term and there's long term, and I mean the short term is kind of where I see myself. The role that I see myself is helping people in the abatements, helping people make sure that their civil rights are maintained. As hard as that is, I mean, you wouldn't think that that's hard, but it is hard to make sure that their rights are being honored as human beings. And then there's the long term, which would be housing. I mean, housing is the ultimate. That's the goal. We need to be getting to housing. You know, we're talking today because of shelters, and shelters are just a short-term fix. You know, which is definitely needed, but our long-term fix is definitely getting everybody housed and lowering the barriers, breaking the barriers actually.
Yeah,
to getting people housed.
Short-term solutions to me are like little puzzle pieces, right? And that long-term solution is the overall puzzle. So Wendy, you know, we're talking about disagreements and how people are working together despite their different voices and opinion. But is there one thing that everyone who's working with the unsheltered population, is there something they all agree on as a starting point on how we tackle this issue?
I think there's very disparate voices. I think after many years of education, there is some agreement that housing folks is the best first step. There is not agreement on how to fund that or when and how to house people, but there is an agreement that it's really hard to achieve mental health stability or to overcome addiction when you're living on the streets. And so the very first step is to house folks and then move from there with the services. And I think that is something that we can agree on, and there is good progress from all the different sides of the aisle and all the different opinions moving forward.
I'm glad you brought up funding and money. I think that's a good place to leave off, and we'll pick it up when we come back. So Wendy and Carl, hold that thought. We do have to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on the nuances in tackling the issues impacting our unsheltered population. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Salt Lake City's pause on new homeless shelters. We pick up now with Wendy Garvin and Carl Moore, two advocates for Utah's unsheltered communities. Wendy, we left off talking about funding and money. Can you talk about the different budgets that are being discussed when it comes to our unsheltered populations?
Yeah, thanks. So the biggest chunk of money that we're talking about in the near future is money for housing. The reason that the prices of housing are going up for all of us, sheltered or unsheltered, is because there is not enough housing in this valley right now. So there is going to be a big one-time ask from the legislature coming up for money for housing, and I'm very hopeful that that goes through, because that is the long-term solution. And I think it's another thing that most of us involved agree on, is that creating housing is going to be one of the biggest fixes. But there are other funds that are constantly debated. There's a mitigation fund, and it has some complicated barriers to it. 30% is guaranteed to South Salt Lake and 30% is guaranteed to Midvale, with the entire rest of the 40% being divided between all of the different cities in Utah. And that leaves Salt Lake City fighting for a much smaller bucket of money when they do the vast majority of the services. I think that reallocating those funds and increasing that fund as a whole would make a big difference in this discussion, because mitigation is anything to help with the problem. So mitigation can be case managers and housing management to go out and help people get housing. But if that money isn't allocated, then we don't have, we don't have a future to move forward to.
And that's another nuance, right, in the complexity of this topic when we talk about our unsheltered population. I want to talk now about shelters, right? That is the topic of our In Focus discussion tonight. Carl, how do you view creating more shelters, permanent and temporary, as part of the solution?
Well, I think that, again, shelters is that's just a temporary, that's a Band-Aid. Those are only Band-Aids for now. But essentially, we need to get to a place where everyone is housed. Everyone has a home. Everyone has their basic needs met, which housing is a basic need. I come from a unique perspective, an indigenous perspective, that everyone, that it's a human right to be clothed, fed, sheltered, doctored, you know, all of those things. So that's where I'm looking at.
Yeah, and we'll dive into your cultural perspective when it comes to our unsheltered population in just a bit. Wendy, let's hear from you. What are your thoughts when it comes to shelters, whether permanent or temporary?
So I am in support of putting together new shelters. The way we build a shelter, the devil is in the details with everything that we do as humans. So folks are reluctant to go to what we call congregate shelters, which is what you're showing a picture of right now, a big open room with cots. There is no place to store your stuff. There's no place to find safety or privacy in a big congregate setting like that. So I support a future of shelters where we have more individual rooms and partitioned off areas and small sections where people can feel safer and have more privacy and have their human rights respected more. But I do support more shelters because we cannot continue to have people living outside on the streets in the winter where they freeze to death.
Right. And Carl, you work, both of you work with our unsheltered populations a lot. What are you hearing from, those who are living out in the streets or in the tents when it comes to the challenges that exist with the shelter system? I mean, how does that pose maybe some difficulties when you have to adapt to certain rules and needs of the shelters?
Well, you said it right there. It's rules. It's the rules that these shelters impose upon the people. I mean, I don't think that a lot of people understand. They have to check in 3 times a day. They have to get searched, depending on whatever shelter you're going to. But there's so many rules and stipulations that a lot of them feel like it is a jail, so to speak. And I really like what Wendy's talking about. The nature of a shelter is you're not safe. You're not really safe. You're not isolated. Whereas a lot of people are dealing with emotional traumas, PTSD, and other traumas, and sometimes the people that have abused them, their abusers, are right next to them, and they have to see each other. Health is a huge thing. We're still dealing with COVID and trying to mitigate that. That is all something that we can, if we had more shelters with walls, like Wendy's saying, I think that's a very good point. We need to have separate rooms where people can feel like they can have some ownership and they can start getting back on their feet again.
Yeah, we have time for each of you to answer one more question. Wendy, as a community, what is the main issue that you feel like we need to address, and what is the issue that we need to look at when we're trying to solve this homeless topic?
I think the thing that we need to fix, the most important thing we need to fix is, as a society, we need to stop arguing about where we put shelters and who should have the responsibility of having a shelter in their backyard. Shelters should be small, they should be everywhere, they should be readily accessible, and we should not be, we as a community, we as a society have a responsibility to those who have reached this point in their lives. We as a society will be better if we can help bring everybody up past the point of homelessness and abject poverty. And what that means is that we can't argue about where those shelters go or whose backyard is impacted, because these folks live in our backyards right now. They live in our alleyways, they live on our front porches. And as long as that is the case, arguing about where to put the shelter is pointless, and it brings us down.
Carl, I'd like to give you the final word. Tell us about your Indigenous perspective, culture, how this all plays into how you view the way we should approach the issues that are experienced by our unsheltered population.
Well, in the Lakota culture, the way that you say amen is all my relations. And that's really what this is all about, is we're all related. All of those unsheltered people are our brothers and sisters and mothers, our fathers, our children, you know. And as Indigenous people, again, you know, we lived in a community way of life where we took care of each other. And that's just, and that responsibility is still ours. So I'm trying to really live the culture that I was born into. Being Indigenous and just taking care of each other. And I don't think that that's something that Indigenous people have a monopoly on. I think that's what everyone should be doing. I mean, no matter if you're thinking about it scientifically as, you know, we're all human beings, we're all one race, or a lot of people will transfer that into some kind of a metaphysical sacred, you know, we're all children of a creator.
Yeah,
so
we don't
speak.
have to be related by blood. We are just connected, right,
We
through
absolutely
Mother
are.
Earth. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but it's been great hearing from Wendy Garvin from Unsheltered Utah, as well as Carl Moore from Pandos. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie.
We'll be right back.